headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's go straight over to my first guest, Deputy Reform UK leader, Dr. David Bull. Good evening, David.
A very good evening to you, Kev.
First up, let me get your comments, your thoughts. It is oddly the big story of the day. This footballer, Kurt Zouma, plays for West Ham, kicking his cat all over the kitchen, grabbing it from his kid's hands, slapping it across the face. Just appalling footage of extreme animal cruelty. We assumed that he would be punished. He's playing for West Ham tonight. He's been selected for the first team. So they're trying to just brush it off as if nothing happened.
I haven't seen that story, actually, but I mean, clearly animal cruelty cannot be tolerated in any form. And if there is evidence, I would have said that the club is wrong to then field him as one of their players tonight. I would have said he should be suspended until it's proven whether he's proven guilty or innocent, wouldn't you?
Yeah, indeed. Well, take a look at the video later on in the evening and you'll see why I kicked off with this, if I can use that soccer analogy, because it is very shocking. And I just think football clubs have got to have a more acute antenna for public outrage. Everybody's furious about this and they've just selected him. Many people were saying today he might never ever play in the Premier League again. And that was this morning. He's playing tonight.
I mean, it's interesting. I often think that professional footballers think they're above the law or think they're above morality. And maybe they're just cocooned by being given too much money and living in an unrealistic world.
Indeed, that definitely is, I think, a problem. Listen, let's get on to our main business of the evening. And before we start our conversation, let's have a listen to Boris in the House of Commons last week.
The report does absolutely nothing to substantiate the tissue of nonsense he has just spoken. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, Mr. Speaker, this leader of the opposition, a former director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker.
Well, those are the offending words that kicked off a storm. That was the best part of a week ago. And things keep on getting worse for Boris. Last night, of course, Keir Starmer and his shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy walked outside Parliament to be assailed by a reasonably small mob of protesters. They're kind of freedom protesters, anti-vaxxers. And one of them was chanting stuff about Jimmy Savile. Now, Boris Johnson has been accused of telling complete lies about all this. But in fact, although it's fair to say that as Director of Public Prosecutions when this happened, Keir Starmer might not have known that Jimmy Savile was being let off the hook by the Crown Prosecution Service, which he was in charge of. That is what happened. It happened on his watch that someone in the Crown Prosecution Service decided that they would not prosecute Jimmy Savile. Now, later on, so appalled was Keir by this decision, he made a public apology. So it did happen on his watch. It is not complete fake news by any manner of means. Also, when Boris said you spent all your time trying to prosecute journalists, he did. He spent a lot of time going back in legal history, ancient history, to find a law from the 13th century with which to prosecute national newspaper reporters for paying public officials for perfectly legitimate whistleblower stories. So the accusations coming from people like from Nicola Sturgeon and Sadiq Khan, and even many MPs from his own side, the former Chief Whip Julian Smith, particularly vociferous in this respect, saying he must apologise for these baseless slurs. Well, they're slurs, but they're not baseless. And as such, he doesn't really have to apologise in terms of the truth. I think he was wrong to say what he did. I think it was bitter, childish, spiteful, uncalled for and hurtful to Savile's many victims. But in terms of the veracity of what he said, it cannot be dismissed as fake news.
Well, let's just go back right to the beginning, because I saw that and I was actually horrified and disgusted by what Boris Johnson said. I thought it was very unstatesmanlike. I thought it was bitter. I thought it was incredibly sort of ill-advised, actually, and smacked of desperation and the need to deflect away from his own problems. And this was don't forget, this was not an attack on the Labour Party or policies. This was a deeply personal attack on a person. You know, there's that great expression, play the ball, not the man. And the more I've thought about this, the more I realise this is not an off-the-cuff comment. You don't come up with something like that off the cuff. This is clearly premeditated, pre-thought out. Clearly people had thought this was a good riposte. And actually, I think it's incredibly bad taste. And when you actually look at, and you're right, he was obviously head of the DPP, and of course that means that he was head of the CPS. Now, the CPS has 7,500 people working for them, of which about half of them are lawyers. And my understanding was that whilst he was DPP, head of the DPP, that he, under his watch, you're right, because he was overseeing that organisation, but the decision was taken not to prosecute because there was insufficient evidence. And my understanding was that that decision had nothing to do with Keir Starmer.
Yeah, no, I accept that, absolutely. You know, Keir Starmer said, I didn't know about this decision. He was subsequently appalled by the decision and made a public apology, but we have to accept what he said, that it didn't come across his desk and he didn't know about it. I bet he wished that he did, because he might have made a different decision. But that isn't the point. To accuse him personally of failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile is not fair and is wrong. It was wrong. And I totally agree with you, David. It was not the right thing to do. It was unstatesmanlike. It was personal, bitter, spiteful, childish, everything a Prime Minister should not be. But what I don't accept, people like Nicola Sturgeon and Sadiq Khan and even several of his own MPs basically saying that the Prime Minister lied. There is veracity to his accusations. Wrong though they were to make, they are not without foundation. And that has to be accusing the Prime Minister of employing fake news. In so doing, they're employing fake news. So we're in a vicious circle here.
Well, it wasn't fake news, you're right. And I actually went back through all the facts just to remind myself. And he was actually head DPP from 2008 to 2013. Now, Savile died in 2011, and the allegations were 2007 and 2008. And to be fair to Keir Starmer, he then instigated that investigation into what went wrong, and he went on to apologise, which is only right for a man in his position. So I don't think Boris Johnson was playing with the truth. I think what he did was wrong, and I think it was bitter, and I just think he's better than that.
Yeah, I agree. So you and I are on the same page in terms of. But
look, he's obviously losing support from his backbench.
Yeah.
Loads of MPs are against him. He's lost 5 of his closest political aides. Something is seriously wrong at the heart of Downing Street. And I think what this shows to me is the Prime Minister will do anything to cling to power. This is a really unedifying sight.
It is. So there's been all these staff changes, reshuffled the staff, and today a minor reshuffle of the cabinet itself. Poor old Jacob Rees-Mogg, who spent the last 2 weeks going around all the studios, defending his boss, the Prime Minister, to the hilt, saying he's a wonderful Prime Minister. It's an honour to serve him. He will go on and win the next election, etc., etc. Well, today he was demoted. He's no longer leader of the House. He's lost his Secretary of State status and is now the Minister for Brexit improvement or some
Brexit opportunities,
an invented job. Why do you think he got booted out?
I don't know. It's a really good question, because actually he's been the one very loyal lieutenant, hasn't he, to Boris Johnson? But clearly, I mean, Boris has got another problem, which is clearly that the Brexit that Boris Johnson pushed through hasn't seen dividends, and he knows that. And so maybe he needs someone in that position to actually talk up the opportunities that Brexit affords. Now, as you know, I fought very hard for Brexit, but I don't think we've realised what we should have done. There are serious problems with it, and maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg has been put in there to do something about it. Whether it happens, I remain very sceptical.
Indeed. To go back to the Boris and Keir dust-up, the other aspect of that baying mob that attacked him, I think that the left have taken up this baton and they've gone too far. They are personally, Nicola Sturgeon said that the Prime Minister was whipping up far-right conspiracy theories. In what way was he whipping up far-right conspiracy theories to suggest that the Crown Prosecution Service was remiss in not prosecuting Jimmy Savile while Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions? What's that got to do with far-right conspiracy theories?
It has nothing to do with it. And who says it's far right? I think what it's done is, remember, words have meaning. And clearly what was meant to be a very clever retort in Parliament using parliamentary privilege has backfired horribly. And whatever is said in that chamber obviously is covered by parliamentary privilege. And there is absolutely no justification and no excuse for anyone to attack anyone in public office. And I find that absolutely abhorrent and disgusting.
Totally. But the BBC is also under fire now, their political reporter, Chris Mason, for essentially blaming Boris in a report on last night's news, saying that Boris... or not saying it definitively, but saying that there were accusations that Boris had personally and deliberately whipped up that small crowd of protesters who harassed Starmer and David Lammy outside Parliament. I mean, that again is taking things too far, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the whole point about news, and particularly BBC News, was it was meant to be impartial. I think the minute you say someone is inciting violence means there is no impartiality there at all. And you're right, in terms of the facts, this is right. But I just think the way it was deployed was just so crass and just so unnecessary. And as I say, the whole point about this was to deflect attention away from the Prime Minister. What I find extraordinary is he refuses to apologise. Not for maybe getting the facts wrong, but apologising for not getting the tone right and realising actually that his own members of Parliament are against him. I think the public were fairly horrified by what he said. And I would have said that the clever way out of this would have been to apologise and to say the tone was wrong and it was said in the heat of the moment, and that obviously and I feel very sorry for the victims and the families of those victims of Savile, because it's brought back all of these absolutely horrific memories to the forefront again, and they're having to relive this again, and that's simply unacceptable.
Which is, of course, why his chief political advisor, a woman who had worked very closely with him for 14 years, Minura Mirza, sensationally quit last night in utter fury over the Jimmy Savile comments, which again feeds into this picture of utter chaos in Downing Street. To go back to the real central story, I mean, we've managed to talk about Boris now for 10 minutes without mentioning Partygate, but the reshuffle of the staff and the reshuffle of the cabinet, only a tiny reshuffle, it hasn't in any ways dispelled his woes, has it?
No, it hasn't at all. And we talked about this last week. And the fact is, the whole point about Russia and Ukraine and him flying over is, again, deflection. This is all about deflection techniques. I understand that members of Parliament go on a recess. Again, another one. And of course, he's hoping that during that time that this story will abate and that the press will forget about it. I actually think what this shows, and this is something quite interesting, Boris Johnson is very vulnerable at the moment. We don't know how many letters have gone in. And clearly, Rishi is on manoeuvres, isn't he? The fact is, without a doubt, he wouldn't stand by his boss and wholly justify what Boris had done. And clearly, there are moves afoot. And I think Rishi sees himself as the next Prime Minister. And I think the next few days are going to be critical for Boris Johnson to see how many people put letters in. Now, my understanding, talking to some of my friends who are Conservative members of Parliament, and that's where I do believe politics should be, is that you should be able to disagree with each other and still be mates. My understanding is there are more letters poised to go in, but the question is they need to reach that 43, don't they?
54.
54, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some stories that they're already over 50. Others say there's only about 10. So it's impossible to work out where we're at with that, because Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee who receives all the letters, is famously utterly secretive about the process, and rightly so. Listen, I'm glad you brought up Rishi Sunak, because we're going to talk about him after the break. David, stay where you are. I'm still talking to Deputy Reform UK leader Dr. David Bull.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.